So now that we have exposed our roll of film in our camera, it's time to process our film. And this is what gets me excited about black and white photography, because it's a photochemical process, and every film emulsion and every chemical reaction happening is going to produce a distinctly unique image quality. Each film developer combination that we use will have a different appearance. The look and feel of the image will be different, and also I have a lot of control over what the final image looks like based upon the variables involved with chemical reactions, which is time and temperature, so as well as the chemical compositions that we're working with. And I'll go into more of that a little bit later. Right now what we want to talk about is what do we need to be able to process our film. I've set aside here 3 different types of film tanks. We're going to be processing in light tight tanks. What's nice about the process with 35mm is that once we have loaded our film and put it into a tank, it is light tight and we can pour our chemicals in and dump them out with the lights on. So we only have to be in the darkroom for the short period of time where we're actually putting our film onto a reel that's going to go into the tank. Now, like I said, I have 3 different kinds of tanks here, and I'm going to start out with talking about this metal tank, stainless steel tank, and the way this works is it's got a lid that's got a baffle on here that keeps it light tight, that we can pour chemistry in and out. This is a deep tank that allows me to have several rolls of film stacked up in there. And this is a metal reel. And we don't generally, this is kind of the old school film development technique where you would actually in the dark have to load the film starting at the core, at the center core. It's been so long since I've done this. And you would literally start from the center and wind out, and doing this all in complete darkness because you'll fog your film, okay? So this is a stainless steel method. We generally don't use that in today's world because we've got a lot simpler systems to work with. Now, you will run into stainless steel, and I will share with you that I actually still keep some of these stainless steel tanks around because they're really good for pouring developer in. I've got a stainless steel, I can pour my developer in and I can change the temperature because it's stainless steel. It conducts heat very quickly. So I can either lower or raise the temperature of my developer very quickly in a stainless steel. But I just do it for that purposes only. I like to work with the plastic tanks because plastic holds heat, holds the temperature a little bit more stable. And so once I've poured my chemicals in, the plastic tank isn't going to change temperature as quickly, because one thing about metal is it will get hot or cold very, very quickly. Now, the reels that we have 2 different kinds of reels here. I like to call this the reel with training wheels, that is the easiest to work with. And again, I'm just playing with a plastic roll of film here, and we'll talk about how we actually go through the process in just a moment. With this reel, we have these guides that we just slide it, and one of the things we want to look for on each of these reels is make sure there's 2 ball bearings, and those ball bearings will grip the film and allow it to go one direction and not the other. So that's what allows it to get wound onto the plastic reel. And what will happen here is we're going to take the roll of film and pull it just past the ball bearings, and we'll be able to just wind one side and it will wind it onto the reel very, very quickly. Now, I'll just tell you real quick, I always put my finger to keep it from winding in on itself and kinking the film. So we just wind that up like this until it gets to the very end. And what we have is everything's on this little ledge. The film sprocket area is on this ledge. And when we pour chemicals in, it's able to get through and come into contact with both the front and the back surface area of all the film so that we can have a complete development process. Okay? Now I'm going to take this apart, and this is the way you take the reels apart actually, is you actually just rotate it to the right, it gets tight, and this is the one time where you go ahead and push it beyond that, and it will open up the reel. Okay, now if this was wet film, it would stay and you'd see it all in position. With these reels, these plastic reels with what I call the training wheels, the way they go back together is you will push them together and snap them back into position. But you have to be aware of, you can actually get these off by 90 degrees. There's these grooves in here, and if these gates don't line up, you're not going to be able to load your film. So always make sure you check before you turn the lights off that you have ball bearings, you have your gates lined up, you can feel where you're going to load the film into the longer portion of the guide system here, and you're just going to wind it on. Now, this is another plastic reel, and again, the difference from the metal is with the metal reels, we start in the center and work our way out. We're still doing the same thing we did with this plastic reel where we have the guides that make it easy. I call it the training wheel. This has less of a guide, but it still works the same way. We still want to check for the ball bearings to make sure. We want to check that the gates are lined up correctly. Also, just want to point out each of these plastic reels is designed for multiple format sizes. So for example, at the widest setting, it will handle medium format, what we call 6x6 or 120 film format, as opposed to 35 millimeter. And then there's some older, this would be like a 70 millimeter film stock, like IMAX film stock. And then we have the 35 millimeter film stock here. Same basic process. We're going to load it just past the ball bearings and start winding it. Now I can let it hang down so it's not catching itself. I like to put my finger with my fingertips down. It's not going to cause any problem, and I'll just wind it onto the reel. Okay, now with the plastic tanks, there's one other really important difference. You'll notice with the stainless steel tank, we are able to just drop our steel reel in, and you'll notice the lid has its own baffle that the chemistry is coming out the sides of it, and it's able to be poured in into the top, and there's no light leaking. With the plastic tanks, and I have two different styles of plastic tanks here. This is a screw-on lid. This orange plastic is really just to keep chemicals from pouring out when we're doing a agitation cycle, which I'll talk about in a moment. But what's really important, I'll take this off here for you to see, is when I have that off, there's a larger opening that makes it very easy to pour the chemistry through there. But what keeps it light tight, and what's really important to double check, is that there is a center post, and when you put this lid on, the center post is going like a sleeve into the lid. So the light is not going to go all the way through that center post and bend around and fog your film. It doesn't do that. Light travels in a straight line, so it's going to hit the bottom and bounce back. Okay? So what's happening here is the tank and the center post have to be in there, because otherwise what's going to happen, if I just put my reel in without that center post, I'm going to essentially create a spotlight fog of light coming through there. So very important that you start out, double check, make sure that you have your center post in there. Your film will go on the plastic reel, your plastic reel will go on the center post. You can have up to 2 35 millimeter rolls of film into your tank, and you will screw this on to make it light tight. Don't over tighten it, don't cross thread it, that sort of thing. There are two different types of plastic tanks that both have the center post. This one has a gasket, a rubberized gasket that's really important to keeping the chemistry from leaking, because the threads are on the outside. Okay, so when you have the tank with the threads on the outside, you have to make sure this rubber gasket is there. Otherwise, when you go and screw this together, there's just going to be a lot of excess chemicals kind of pouring out as you go through your agitation. So just make sure, and in this case we actually have the lid coming apart on us a little bit, so we have to make sure everything's together, and we put it together. This tank does not have a rubber gasket, so it's one less piece to worry about, and the reason being is the threads are on the inside, and so there's no way the chemicals are going to get past that thread. You'll notice that the post is a little bit different. The design, the bottom of it is a little different, allows the chemicals to flow out a little slightly different. So you can kind of identify which post goes with which tank. And again, this is just to keep chemicals from dumping back out, so we put that on after we've poured our chemicals in, and we will screw that together. Okay? So these are the two tanks that we use here at Spokane Falls Community College. You'll notice they're etched with SFCC photo. When you're ready to process your film, you need to go check out the processing supplies. So that means you're going to get a tank, and you will get 1 to 2 plastic reels depending on how many rolls you're processing. Minimum of 1, maximum of 2 for a tank this size. We do have larger tanks that'll handle up to 4, but for now, for this demo, we'll just start with the standard 2 reels per tank. The other thing that you will need is you will need some scissors, because you remember how your film has a notch on the very beginning. You're not going to be able to load that onto the reel with it only touching on one side, so we're going to be cutting that off flush so that we can get the film loaded onto our reel. In addition to that, you're going to need a thermometer. We have 2 different styles of thermometers here. This is a dial that just sets into the developer beaker, and this is a glass thermometer that we will measure the temperature of the developer in order to determine the appropriate time of which we will process our film. So I just want to show you, the reason we need scissors in the darkroom is this notch area here is not going to be able to load up on the film reel very easily, because the film won't be touching both sides of the reel, so we can't get it loaded evenly. So we're going to need these scissors to be able to cut that flush once we've got the film out of the cassette. So before you start processing film for the first time, it's a good idea to just take a wasted roll of practice film. It's already been fogged. We've got several of them for you to try. And you'll notice that, you know, if it's gotten torn or something, you're going to cut it straight across, just like we do in the dark. And you want to make sure before you start loading your film, you want to look for the ball bearings here and on the other side. If you have one ball bearing missing, you will not be able to load your film properly. It will be uneven. So in this case, we're using the reel with the what I call the training wheels, and you're going to have to get used to doing this in total darkness for just the period of time that you're loading the film. So you're going to take that film and set it on those guides, and you're going to push it and just pull it past those ball bearings, just a little bit past. And you're going to start, and I'll lift the reel. I'll either hang it over so it falls on its own away. We don't want the film to catch on itself as it's loading. So I like to put my fingertip down. My nail isn't going to scratch anything. It's going to be so fast, and then it's going to get processed that I'm not going to do any damage to the film. And I'll just put that across there to keep a little barrier, and I'm going to just wind the right side on here. Now, most students that are having difficulty with this loading the film on the reel is one of 2 reasons. One is it's a natural propensity. When you've got 2 sides of something, we tend to want to push in, and that actually can cause a bind as we're trying to roll it. In fact, I just created a bind just right there. So what I do is I just try to stretch it apart just to keep it loose, pull it slightly apart while I'm rolling it on. The other thing that a lot of students will do is they will go so slow that they actually find that it'll create binds, and or they go too fast. So this is like Goldilocks. We don't want to go so fast that we're careless and we could cause problems, and we don't want to go so slow that any flex or tension can start creating a bind. We just want a nice smooth flow to our loading of the reel. Okay, so now this would be ready to load and put into the tank on the center post, and we'd be ready to go. Just another note on how these come apart is we will go ahead and twist to the right and actually go beyond the stopping point to open that up. And because the film's dry, it's going to wind up really quickly like that. When it's wet, you'll see it in just a little bit when I actually process a roll, where it'll be just in each of those grooves. Just want to show you a close-up now of this other gate. I find that I really like this gate when I'm loading wider medium format film because it's so thin. Those thin emulsions tend to buckle, and it just is nice to get it started with the wide film. With 35mm film, I am fine with either one of these, so don't worry if you end up getting a reel that doesn't have those wide gates. With 35mm, it's so close together that it's really not too difficult to load that in there. Just pull it across. You'll feel it bind at the ball bearings just a little bit, and you just get it past that. And once it's past that, again, I'm just kind of pulling this away to make sure, and I'm just pulling the reel slightly apart from it so there's no binding, and I'm just going at a nice consistent pace to wind our film onto the reel. So when I'm getting ready in the darkroom, I take my tank lid off, set it down, I make sure my center post is in my tank, I inspect my reel to make sure I have both ball bearings and that the gates are lined up, and I know where my scissors are. Then I'm ready to turn off the lights, and when you're first doing this, I recommend you just sit at your desk or sit out in the just at any tabletop surface and do this with your eyes closed, so you kind of remember where everything is. Turn off the light. I've got to close my eyes, and I'm going to feel for the scissors. I'm going to cut the film square. I'm going to pick up the reel, and I'm going to feel with my fingers for where those two gates are and make sure that they're lined up. So I think they're there. I'm going to just pull them across. Just past the ball bearing. And you'll just develop a touch with these. I'm going to start winding it by pulling it slightly apart. I'll get my finger inside between the film that's rolled up on the roll so that it doesn't catch on itself. And I will just, nice even pace, wind my film and keeping my eyes closed to practice. And you can feel it travel across your fingers so you know that you're actually loading okay, and you can listen to it and know when it's going smooth. And now I hear it's moved past the gate, and I'm ready to just grab that center post, put the reel on the center post, put it back into the tank, grab the tank lid, make sure I'm lined up the threads properly, and once that's closed, I'm ready to open my eyes or turn the lights on once I've got it in here. What am I going to do if something doesn't work out? So one of the things I recommend is if I'm developing 2 rolls of film, I take 3 reels with me. If I'm developing 1 roll of film, I take 2 reels with me. Because if I'm having a problem with the reel, the hardest thing in the world is to put this thing back together with your eyes closed or with the lights off, even though I just did it because I've had a lot of practice. That's really hard to do. So what I recommend is if you have a problem with the reel, you go to your backup reel and you load the film onto the backup reel. If for some reason that's having a problem, there's just something not going right, now you're in a panic, what are you going to do? Well, worst case scenario, I'm going to take a tank, open it up, and I will put my film on the side from the post, close it up, and now my film, which is out of its cassette, so it's not, it was totally vulnerable to light if I had turned on the lights on, it's now in the tank next to the center post, so no light's getting to it, and I can turn on the lights and get help. So now I've gathered all my supplies for developing a roll of film. I have my roll of film here, I have a pair of scissors. Notice I'm not walking around with the blades pointing out towards people. I have my reel, I have my thermometer, and I have my tank. One other important piece of equipment I have is a towel, because we never use paper products in a darkroom because it creates so much dust, and dust is the enemy of film. So I've got a cloth towel in here and we're ready to go into the darkroom. When I'm coming into the darkroom, I want to immediately turn, there's two light switches, one for the interior light and one for the darkroom in use. And we want to make sure that that light is on, and then when we close the darkroom door, we're actually going to use this deadbolt to make sure nobody can come in on us in the middle of our processing our film. You will most likely never be asked to mix chemicals in an introductory course, but I want you to be aware of that if you're mixing chemicals, you should be wearing either some safety glasses, whether they're reading glasses or specifically designed safety glasses, or some safety goggles. Also, just know that it's never a good idea to handle chemistry above your eyes, so we don't generally work with chemicals that are up high on a shelf. We want to bring them down to waist level, and you'll notice that we work with our chemicals down into a sink area. The other thing I would highly recommend, though, is to keep your clothes nice. Whenever you're working in the darkroom, don't hesitate to wear an apron. It's not that there's going to be any stains or any problems with the chemicals that you're working with, other than the fact that as chemicals dry, you'll have a residue that needs to be washed out, and you'll probably want to eliminate any odor from the darkroom traveling with you when you leave for the day. So I like wearing an apron when I'm processing film. So although I'm not wearing safety glasses for processing film, I do want to make one other note, which is I am going to work with a cloth towel that I will cover up to absorb any moisture of any chemicals as I'm going through the inversion part. If you have skin that is particularly sensitive, then by all means wear some latex or nitrile gloves over your hands to protect your skin. Generally, once you've loaded the film onto the reel and put it in the tank, you're done needing that sort of really sensitive touch to be able to handle that. So, and that's all before the chemicals. Once we start the chemicals, if you have any safety concerns or if you have any concerns about skin irritant, be sure and put on some latex or nitrile gloves. So there are a wide variety of chemicals that we use for film development. The characteristics that film developers have affect the overall image quality that we end up with. And there are three primary factors in choosing a film developer. The first factor is shadow detail. Does it really develop the least exposed areas with full textural detail? So different developer film combinations will yield different shadow density values, and so shadow detail is an important part, but not the most important. A second category is grain size. Different chemical combinations with the film will yield a different grain size that's reducing the silver halide salt into metallic silver, different sizes of clumping. So grain is a factor. A third factor that's distinct from grain size, and yet you would think would be related, but it's not, is the sharpness of our image, the acuity of the image. So when you're looking at film developers, we're looking at those three factors: the shadow detail, the grain size, and the acutance, or the acuity of the image. Some of the sharpest images will have larger grain, and some of the softest images will have the finest grain, because what's happening is the developer is breaking those silver halide crystals down into smaller and smaller clumps to reduce grain size, but at the expense of overall sharpness. What we are most commonly using with our introductory courses is a T-Max developer that is designed to have excellent shadow detail. And the reason we use it is for two reasons. One, it comes in a liquid that's easy to mix rather than starting from a powder, so there's a safety factor of not having to deal with inhalants while mixing the chemicals. Two, because it's so good at shadow detail, it helps offset the tendency of new photographers of underexposing film, that it's kind of a foolproof method of making sure you get something on your film to have success when you're first starting out. As you get more advanced and you want to try some different formulas with your film, I'm going to recommend that we start working with some developers that either are more dilute, and they're so dilute that you only use them once, it's a one-shot developer, or it's just a different combination where you're going to have to mix your own film. I will tell you that for my personal work, I have looked at a lot of different developers, and two of my favorites are D76 and HC110. The deciding factor on which one I work with is dependent upon the development times and the characteristics of the film developer combination. Meaning that there are some films that cannot be processed in HC110 because the development time would be shorter than 4 minutes. I never want to have a development time shorter than 4 minutes because it's not enough time to give a smooth gradation in an area of an image such as a blank sky where you just need to have that full development time out there. So I always want to develop a minimum of 4 minutes. And so there are some films that just are the HC110 combination doesn't work for. If that's the case, I'll switch to my old standby, which is D76 diluted 1:1. Gives me a slower development time and allows me to get a full range of development. However, in terms of health and safety, I really like HC110 because it's a phenodone developer as opposed to a what we call an MQ developer, a methyl hydroquinone developer, which prolonged exposure to has been known to cause some health problems. But again, you can mitigate that through safety barriers such as gloves, goggles, etc. If I measure the temperature of my developer and it is above 75 degrees or it's below 68 degrees, I'm going to need to warm or cool that developer down. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to come out to the sink that's in the hallway here, and I'm going to take the drain plug and I'm going to put it in to plug this sink right here on the side. Push that down. I'm going to rotate the spigot over here, and the reason we do our heating and cooling of our developer here is because we have a positive all cold water or we have a positive all hot water if we needed to warm that up. So in this case I'm going to cool it off. That's the most common problem, is that the temperature is too high. And what's going to happen is this water is going to fill up this reservoir, and there's these holes that will allow the water to drain, the overflow to drain out into the other side of the sink. So now I can get my developer and set it in there. So what we're doing is we're trying to get as much of that developer in the cold water as possible. We can watch our temperature, and at this point when I'm trying to change the temperature, I take the dial off of, I don't want the plastic because if it's touching the plastic, it's going to be warmer or colder along that plastic, and I'm more concerned about the temperature in the middle. And when it reaches to the desirable temperature, I'll be able to pull it out and it'll be ready to go. So now that we're in our film processing darkroom, there's some things that we need to go over first. Most importantly, whether you're in a private darkroom or in a community darkroom like we have here, we need to track how much film is being processed because the chemicals will become exhausted over time. So what we have is a chart that we write down the number of rolls that we're processing. So in this case, I'm putting 1 roll. We put our date that we're processing it. So today is the 8th of the month. And we put our name down so we kind of can keep an honor system going of who's processing the film. Now, we have a capacity with the chemicals that we're using to develop close to 20 rolls of film. We're erring on the side of caution of keeping the freshest, best chemical condition for you so that we don't have to alter the times for development on this. So we actually cut off at 16 rolls of film. So if I were doing 2 rolls of film, I would fill out another line and put in the information as well of how many rolls we're processing. So we just are marking and visually seeing as we're getting down to the end of our development time. Some other things that we have in the darkroom, we have a timer, and the timer is one that we just put the minute dial to the time, and it's already on. So typically what I'll do is I'll put the second time beyond what I need it to be, and I'll start pouring as soon as that timer gets to the 0 mark. We'll go over that more in detail, but that's a straightforward timer that's easy to watch and know what time we need to do our agitation. If you're using our T-Max developer, it is pre-mixed up in a gallon jug, and it's always just a good idea to kind of shake it up because, again, we're developing up to 16 rolls of film, so we shake it up to make sure we get it well mixed and even chemical reaction. We're going to pour, you'll notice we have a beaker for the developer. Each beaker is designed to be used with one specific chemical, and we only use that chemical in there because we don't want any contamination. The developer is one that we will actually, when we're all done, use a funnel to pour back into our gallon supply of developers so that we can shake it up and have it ready for the next person to process film. So in the darkroom, we have different beakers for each chemical, and they're clearly labeled. This one is for the developer. We only use one kind of chemical in each of these beakers. So we have a developer beaker, we have a stop bath beaker, and we have a fixer beaker. The developer is the only one that we actually are also using with a funnel to be able to pour back into a gallon jug because we're able to shake it up and reuse it and process up to 16 rolls of film. I recommend that you, for 35 millimeter, that you fill up your developer with 16 ounces per roll of film, and that will raise the amount of developer will come up above, just slightly above the reel of film. So we have to have enough developer that the whole roll of film is getting processed at the same time. So if I had 2 rolls going on, I'd want at least 32 ounces of chemicals for each of the chemicals, the developer, the stop, the fix. So that's the first thing I want to check when I'm getting set up to process film, is making sure I have at least 16 ounces per roll of film I'm processing. So now I've got my developer in a jug, gallon jug. I've got my beaker. I'm going to pour it into the beaker, but I'm going to do it over the sink. Each darkroom has a sink in it, and so I'm going to go ahead and process, or I'm not process, I'm going to go ahead and pour developer in there. And I'm going to pour a little more than I'm actually going to use, just because I want to, it's not going to hurt anything. I'm going to be pouring it back in here. What I'm most concerned about is each darkroom should already have some stop bath and fixer. Now the stop bath, I don't know if you can see this very well, but it is a yellow stop bath and has kind of a vinegar smell to it. It's a slightly acidic process, and we use a indicator stop bath that turns purple when it's exhausted. So I always like to double check and make sure there's not too much purple color cast to it. And I want to make sure that at this point I only have 12 ounces in here. I'd like to have closer to 16 ounces. So I'm going to go ahead and get some more of that before I get started. And the same is true with the fixer. I'm going to go ahead and check it. And when looking at fixer, I always look at the color of it, and if it looks a little creamy or milky, it's exhausted. If you have any concerns, we have a hypo check that you can ask a lab technician to come check the fixer to make sure it's still good. But it goes bad by kind of becoming a creamy color. You have to be careful with fixer in that it needs to be fresh, because it's one of the most important chemicals for ensuring the longevity, the archival keeping properties of our negatives. So I'm looking to make sure it's not too creamy or cloudy. I'm double checking to make sure we haven't exhausted the number of rolls of film before I start processing, and I'm making sure that I have enough volume here. I've got the 16 ounces I need. Okay, it's going to get a little bit noisy in here, and then I'm going to keep some running water. And it's always good to have some water running while processing film, because if you get any chemicals on your fingers and you're not wearing nitrile gloves, you just want to rinse it off with water. And again, it's not particularly toxic. The water gets turned on with a valve right up here. It's a little different than your household faucet, so we're just going to turn that on. And you'll notice we have a temperature gauge so we can judge how hot or cold the water is. We generally want our water temperature to be somewhere in that range of 65 to 85 degrees for a wash, and ideally at about 68 degrees for mixing up chemicals, because we generally want to process our film somewhere between 68 and 75 degrees. So when you're in the dark room and the door's closed, you've locked it from inside so nobody can actually accidentally open the door while you're trying to load your film, the first thing you need to do is break open the cassette. And the way we're going to do that is we have a little kind of a bottle opener type of device that we're going to take the film, and we're not going to use the part that's sticking out. We're actually going to take and slide this in here, just right up in here, and I'm going to pry and twist at the same time. Pry and twist. Okay? And you'll see that this, you won't see because it's dark, but you're going to feel it come out. And when it gets far enough, you can either go ahead and pop it off all the way, or you peel it off by hand, right? Now, I'm just going to set that down, and I'll clean up after myself afterwards. What's more important is we got to get the film out of the cassette, and at this point I can now just tap this on the table to expose part of the reel, and I can pull this out very easily. Now remember, we're doing this in total darkness, so we're just showing you what you're going to do. So now you're going to turn back towards your countertop and visually remember where you put your scissors so that you can load your film. So now I've turned back towards the counter and I have a visual memory of where everything is. I know my tank is here, my lid is off and ready to go, and I have my reel here. My reel is all lined up with the gate and everything. But I'm just going to trim this off, and again we're going to be doing this in total darkness. I'm going to reach for the film reel, and my fingers, and you'll notice that if the gates aren't lined up, I will feel and pull the gates to where they're all lined up, and I will load the film along the edges. And again, I'm not afraid to touch the film with my finger just to get it started on there, and I will pull it up, and I'll pull it just past the bearings. Now, you hear it pop across the bearing a little bit. It might be a little difficult at first, but don't be afraid. You're not going to hurt anything at the front of the roll. It's all fogged in film anyway. So now I'll get started. I'll let it hang down away from the reel, and I will load the film. When I get to the end, I'm going to feel the spool that the film came on, and that's another time that I'm going to have to use my scissors. So when I get to the end of the reel, I'm going to take my scissors and again just carefully run it between my finger and the spool and cut it off. Now if it drops on the floor, no biggie, we'll clean up after we turn on the light. So I've got my film loaded onto the reel. I'm going to set it onto the center post. Once I've got center post, I'm going to remember where the lid is, and I will screw the lid on tight. At that point, I'm ready to turn the lights on, and everything else I do will be in with the lights on and the door open. So I've looked up the development time for my temperature, developer, and film combination, and I need a 5.5 minute development time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the clock. I'm actually going to set it to 6 minutes, I should say. Turn it on, and I'm going to watch the dial, and as it gets down, when it hits 5 minutes and 30 seconds, I will begin pouring my chemicals. So now it's getting close to the 30-second mark, and I'll be ready to start pouring developer. And I'm pouring now. The reason I start pouring at the exact time, the start time of my processing time, rather than start pouring a little beforehand, is because I'm actually going to let the clock run all the way out back to 0 at the last minute, and before I start dumping the chemical out. So the lag time between how long it took me to pour the chemical in and how long it'll take me to pour the chemical gently back out will even out, so I get the full 5.5 minute development time. So I have my film, my exposed film, loaded on the reel. It's in the tank, it's light tight, we're ready to process. We've measured our temperature of our developer, and we've looked up our proper development time. In this case, I need a 5.5 minute time. So now we're just going to follow the step-by-step procedures for processing film. The first thing we're going to do is a 30-second pre-soak with water. And what that's going to do is that's going to cause some of the gelatin emulsion to swell just a little bit, and it's going to allow the chemicals to get into where the silver halide crystals are more efficiently, so that we can get a more even development. So we're just going to go ahead and go to the sink here, move everything out of our way. So we've got our developer, our stop, and our fix. And here's what I would do. I have a 5.5 minute development time. I have a 30-second soak. So what I'm going to do is I just set my timer to 7 minutes here. And I know that's going to give me 30 seconds to get ready to put the water in. It's going to give me enough time for 30-second soak, dump it out, and be ready to pour my developer in. So now I'm going to pour just water into the tank, and I'm just going to hold it there until I see the water coming out of the top. Now it's coming out of the top, and I'm just going to let it just do a quick wash. And now the clock's at 30 seconds. I'll let it sit there. I'll invert it once and drop it back down, and I'm going to tap it. You'll hear me tap all the time in darkroom, and that's to break any air bubbles that would cause an uneven processing. So air will keep chemicals and water from coming into contact with the film. We want everything to be evenly soaked. And now we're at the end of our 30 seconds, and it's water, and water can go back down the sink. Nothing else goes down the sink. This is the only time I would actually empty anything into the sink. Let me reiterate, no chemicals go down the sink. So I've drained that out, and don't be surprised if you see a little bit of discoloration of the water coming out, because it's mixed in with a little bit of the gelatin. So now I'm ready, and I'm going to start pouring at the 30-second mark, and I'm pouring my developer in. And don't panic, just nice and smooth. We don't want it spilling all over the place. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill it. I've got plenty of developer for one roll of film, and I will go ahead and fill it up. I can see it at the top there. I'm going to close that. I'm going to take my rag, and now I'm going to put the rag over the tank, and I'm going to gently invert it, tap it, rotate it, invert it, tap it, and I'm going to do this continuously for the first 30 seconds. And what we're doing is we're making sure that the developer is fresh and in contact with those silver halide crystals. So we agitate continuously, because during that first part of the development process is when we're getting the shadow values. The lowest exposed areas of our scene are being processed first. So now I've done my 30 seconds. I'll set it down, and I'll watch the clock. So what's interesting and magical about film-based black and white photography is that when we expose our film initially, the light is changing the electrical charge of those silver halides, either a silver iodine, silver bromide, or silver chloride halide salt. These are the silver salts, if you will. So when we expose in the camera using our aperture and shutter speed, what we're actually doing is that light energy is changing the electrons in that silver halide, and it's creating what's known as a latent image that you can't really see, but basically you're causing the silver to break apart from the halides, and the silver halides together are extremely light sensitive. Once that silver breaks apart and becomes metallic silver, it becomes inert, and so we see our density. Well, initially we can't see the image, that we're just having enough light energy to tickle those electrons, so to speak, but the rest of the development actually happens through a chemical process, a reaction that we are inducing by introducing a developer. And so the developer is further essentially exposing the film. It's causing amplification of the image. So now that I'm at the last 30 seconds, I'm getting ready to dump out. I'm going to bring my beaker over that's empty for the developer to go back into. I'm going to take off the orange plastic lid and set it aside. And I'm going to patiently wait till we get to the very end. And I'm going to dump that out. And remember, I'm going to pour it out about the same speed as I poured it in, and the combination of that will make for an even development time. Now I'm going to take the stop bath, and I will pour the stop bath in immediately. I won't worry about the timer. The time is most critical on the developer. The stop bath is really, it's like a vinegar. It's a slightly acidic. Your developer is a base or an alkaline, and so what we're doing is we're helping to neutralize the pH and stop that development action. And what I will do is set my timer at that point. I'll set it to 10 minutes. Put the lid back on. I will agitate continuously for 30 seconds just to make sure I'm getting a good stop of that development action. Stop it for 30 seconds. Now I'm just going to gently, again, none of these times are particularly critical at this point because the developing out process is done. We're just stopping the chemical reaction. I'm going to pour the stop out. And now I'm going to pour the fixer in. And I don't even care about the clock at this point. We're using a rapid fix, Kodak rapid fix without hardener, because the film emulsions these days really don't need the extra hardening, and that's a whole separate topic of discussion. We use the same fixer for paper, just with film it's a higher concentration. With paper we dilute it 1:1, and the biggest reason we don't use hardener is we don't like to use it with our black and white paper, because it inhibits being able to do post-processing techniques such as toning a print and changing its color, but that's a whole separate issue. Anyway, so now I've got 8 minutes left. I've just been kind of slow about this whole process. Rapid fix, if it's fresh, should clear the film in 4 to 6 minutes. Some emulsions take a little bit longer to clear, so typically a 8 to 10 minute is kind of a safe time in there. You don't want to leave it too long, but certainly not going to hurt anything by an 8 to 10 minute clearing time for the fixer. So essentially the fixer is a sodium thiosulfate. It's the same chemical that William Henry Fox Talbot discovered would make his photogenic drawings last longer, and it's composed of primarily a sodium thiosulfate that will bond with the halides, the unexposed silver halides in the film, and pull those away from the metallic silver, thus clearing the unexposed area of the film. If you ever underfix your film and open up and look at it, you will see that silver halide is a white or creamy gray color, and the metallic silver, of course, is black. And so if your film still has this kind of milky, opaque color, it hasn't been fixed long enough, and so you want to immediately put it back in the dark and put some fresh fixer in there. So I agitate for the first minute of the fixer, and then I will set it down, and I will agitate it once a minute thereafter. Okay, our timer has gone off. We are done with the fixer, and now I know our film is stable. The image has been reduced to a metallic silver. And so our next step is to do a short wash. And what we're doing for washing is we're essentially diluting any residual chemistry out of the emulsion. And so I've taken the lid off because now I can stick the tube or the water hose into the center tube of the tank. I can turn up the volume a little bit more. I also like to, at this point, just kind of rinse my hands off a little bit in the process and wipe them down. It's always a good idea to wipe your countertop off. We want to keep everything clean. And fixer, when it dries, it looks like water when it's wet on the counter, but when it dries, it'll form a white powder. So I want to wet the rag just a little bit and go ahead and wipe down that counter to make sure I'm not getting any of that chalky fixer powder on the countertop. You can see where people have dripped on the edge of the cabinet, and I want to just make sure this is clean. Leave the darkroom cleaner than you found it. And now, while that's washing, I have an empty graduate here that says PermaWash. PermaWash is something that's going to help, again, remove that fixer more efficiently than just water dilution. And so PermaWash is a very durable chemical in that we mix it up once a day, and it will handle an amazing amount of film. You can't really exhaust it within a day, other than it gets old for oxidation. So typically I'm going to go, while that's washing, out into the hallway where we keep a jug of PermaWash mixed each day, and I will fill that up with just enough to cover my film. PermaWash in there. I'm setting the timer for 1 minute. I'm going to agitate for the first 30 seconds. Let it sit for 30 seconds. And then we can, once that PermaWash has been poured for this darkroom, we will pour it back into the graduate, and it'll be useful for the entire rest of the day for as many rolls as need to be processed today. So our minute's up. We're going to pour it back into the graduate. I'm going to open the lid. And we're going to have a final wash for 5 or 6 minutes. So the last step in this whole process is, before drying the film, before we hang it to dry, I should say, we're going to put it in a wetting solution known as PhotoFlow. PhotoFlow is a solution that we use. It's good for your skin. It's an antifungal agent. Which is important with color photography, but with black and white, since it's metallic silver, silver is a natural deterrent to any fungus or mold anyway, so that's not an issue. But what it does do for us is it allows the water to wick off of the emulsion without creating hard water spots or without creating streaks on our film that would ruin our image quality. So it's very important to use PhotoFlow. It takes very little. In order to mix PhotoFlow up, all we do is take and fill just a little cap full, dump it in a tank, and fill that tank up with water. Now, we've already done that, and typically I want to do PhotoFlow early in the day before I even get very started with it, because it will be very bubbly. It's very soapy-like, and so you don't want all those soap bubbles to dry on your film. So we have the film tank ready with PhotoFlow, and I'm just going to get my reel and we will do our last step. So I'm carefully carrying my tank. There's still water in it. I've got the lid off, and I'm going to take my reel of film off of the center post, And it's very exciting because you can see, you can't really see the images because the frames are rolled around each other and they build up density. But I'm going to go ahead and drop that down in here and just gently go back and forth. So I'm just going to gently move it side to side, and all those slots in the reel, just like for film processing, are going to allow the whole emulsion to come into contact with that PhotoFlow wetting agent. Now I'll pull it out. I'll take my rag that I have with me and I'll just hold it underneath to catch the drip, and we're going to go into the next room. So I'm holding the rag underneath the reel. I'm going to bring it into the drying room. And what I'm going to do now is, remember how we open up the reel by turning it just past, and we open that up, and if you can see this real quick, see how the film was loaded and it's not touching, it's just in a spiral with none of the film touching, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm bring this over to the dryer. So before I open the drying cabinet, I want to inspect and make sure that this air little ball isn't blowing around, and that tells me that it's turned on. And so we want to make sure this is not down at the bottom and not floating in air there. So I've got to turn this off and watch that drop down. That tells me that the air is turned off and I'm safe to open the cabinet without sucking a whole lot of dust in there. So this is a nice cabinet that's got a filter system that keeps dust out of it, circulates air, it's got a temperature control. We just leave it at medium. Somebody has a roll of film in here, so we want to be careful and not touch anybody else's film. When drying film, it's best if you're going to do large quantities, or there's a group of you, we're going to take our film and just drop it away from the reel, and we're going to not put it at the front so that everybody has to dive past it to hang behind there, but rather we're going to work our way from the back of the cabinet and clip the film at the top, and then we're going to take a clip from the side here, just a little clip, and we're going to put that on the very bottom of our film so that it hangs tight, because what film does, as the gelatin is drying, it's going to curl up and bulge, and it's not until it actually gets near to being dry that it flattens back out for us. So I've got it hanging there safely. I haven't touched anyone else's film. I'm going to close the cabinet, secure it, and I will turn the dryer on. Now, if you don't have a dryer, film will dry in a few hours and it'll go through its curling and such, and you just need to have a dust-free environment, a closet, so to speak, that you can dry your film in. We have the advantage of this drying cabinet that's got a fan. It's going to circulate the air, and within about 15 minutes we will have a dry roll film ready to sleeve. So it's been 15 minutes or so. Film should be dry. We'll check it by turning off the power to make sure we don't bring any dust into the cabinet. Open it. Carefully reach back and get the film out of there and pull it out and take the weight off of it. Put that back in the closet. And I'll bring this over to the light table. This looks pretty nice. I can see plenty of good densities on here, so we're good to go. So our very last step for today is to cut up our film into segments and put them into neg file sleeves. These are a archival plastic protective page that's inert and won't damage our film over time. So what we need to do is double check how many frames these particular sleeves will hold. So I'll hold the sleeve over the film and see that I can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames per row on the page. So at that point, I'm going to go ahead and just cut off the excess film at the beginning, and I'm going to just handle the film at this point just along the edges, and I'm going to cut between the frames very carefully. And I will slide that into our sleeve. So now I have my negatives sleeved. It's exciting. I can look at them and see that I have some really nice exposures. And the next thing I need to do is, before I forget, is I need to write down where this film was photographed, what roll number it is, and if I'm really diligent, I might even write what page number in my exposure notebook that I can find all my notes about what I photographed here. So we have finished sleeving our negatives. It's really exciting to see the results after all that work. And that's where the lesson will end for now. And we'll see you again in the darkroom real soon. It's been a beautiful day in the darkroom today. A beautiful day in the darkroom today.